Um, Immediately to my left on the screen is Melissa Martin. She is the director of programs here and program evaluation at Food Farm Coalition, and this is really her baby, this mini grant program. And then I also have Julie Scher, and she is our Transition to Organic Partnership Coordinator on the call. And so, as you guys know, we are here to talk about the Food and Farm Business Mini Grant Program. And these grants can be used for a number of things in your food and or farm business. Really, these grants are designed to sort of get you over the hump. If you're trying to get to an expansion, if you're trying to introduce a new product, if you're trying to get some education under your belt to do something else in your business, or if you're trying to get to a certification. And that might be a GAP certification, that might be FSMA. Another opportunity is organic. So there's a lot of effort on helping folks transition to organic. And I wanted to give Julie Scher the floor for just a moment to talk about the Transition to Organic program while we had a captive audience. Julie?
Yeah, sure. So Transition to Organic Partnership Program, it goes by TOPP, T-O-P-P. Basically, if this is something that you've ever thought about, or maybe you're already doing mostly organic practices, but you're not, legit, like you can't use the term organic. Right now, the USDA has this TOPP partnership program. And in a nutshell, there's more assistance right now for people wanting to transition and enter into certification than there has ever been. And so the P in partnership, it comes from this mentorship program. So essentially, if this is something that you want to do or you want to explore, you think that it will help your operation, you're going to get hooked up with a mentor that will hold your hand through the process. And then it also comes with a $500 stipend that you can use towards continuing education. So it doesn't pay for your certification fees or anything like that, but it's more for attending a conference, any sort of educational opportunity like that. But you'll have a mentor, and your mentorship will happen on a schedule that you arrange one-on-one with this person. So they're going to work with your schedule, and it happens over Zoom most of the time. It could also, happen by phone or just whatever you and your mentor arrange. But one really good thing about that is that it's not going to take you off of your farm. You're not going to be incurring expenses for travel, hotels, or anything along those lines. So you'll jump on a Zoom call, with your mentor. You'll be walked through the program. They'll take you all the way up to assisting you filling out the paperwork, setting up your records, and then they'll stay with you for a certain time period into your certification. Just different factors kind of depend on, how long you stay enrolled in TOPP and things like that. And I see a couple names on here that I know have been working with the NRCS at one point or another and may have already have a transition plan for their farm. One good thing about the TOPP program is that at the end of it, there really is an expectation that you will apply for certification. And so that program and your mentor, they're going to help you through that process. You'll have basically one deliverable if you choose to participate in TOPP. And that deliverable is a completed application. And you'll complete that as you go through the program with your mentor. And then you can kind of use it like a cheat sheet when you go to write the real thing. There's no cost to you for signing up for TOPP. And so if that's something that you're interested in, Spencer, what do you think would be the best way? Maybe just, do you want to throw an email for me or Food or Farm or whatever in the link?
Yeah, I'm going to put Julie's email address in the chat box here. And if anybody's interested in signing up for TOPP or interested in learning more information, please do contact Julie. There are actually a few mentees on the call tonight, so we're really excited to see these guys on the call.
Yeah, give me a call and or send me a text, and then maybe we'll call and kind of talk about, if this program is right for you or things like that. But the whole sign up, it's really easy. I mean, they've really made it very user friendly.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Julie, for taking a couple minutes just to introduce this really cool opportunity for folks who are looking at transitioning to organic. And it's a really great food for thought about how this money could potentially be used for that, as well as a wide-ranging set of other things. That being said, a couple of housekeeping things as we move forward tonight. We're basically going to go into an in-depth overview of how to write a good application. There are almost 50 people on the call. So you can imagine that we're going to get a lot of applications. And so it's our goal, it's Melissa's goal to help you guys know everything that you need to know to write the best application possible. Melissa will go through this slide by slide. And at the end of every slide, basically what we'll do is we'll take a moment for questions. During this portion of the presentation, if folks will write their questions in the chat box, I will monitor them. If it's anything that I can answer, I'll go ahead and answer back in text. But if it's for the good of the order, I'll bring them to Melissa during the slide presentation. At the end of the slide presentation, we will open it up for more questions. We're trying to reserve quite a bit of time for more questions. Folks are welcome to put questions in the chat then, or we'll invite folks to come off mute to ask questions. That being said, if everybody can double check right now and make sure that your mic is on mute, or if you're joining us via phone, that you're on mute. We don't want to be distracting to other folks on the call. Like I said, we'll invite folks to come off mute at that time. If you have a burning question, but it's very specific to your operation and maybe not for the good of the order, what we're going to invite you to do is consider saving that question and booking a consultation with Melissa or myself. So we just made this function live today. Melissa will go through it a little bit later, how you can access that. But this group of people, the folks on the webinar, are going to be the first who have access to the scheduling consultations. And Melissa and I will listen to your pitch. We'll answer questions, whatever ideas you have, and we can kind of direct you in your applications. Neither of us are sitting on the selection committee. So that will be available first to you guys, and that's just being made available this evening. But we'll talk about that more later. With that being said, I will start paying close attention to the chat, and I'm going to hand this over to Melissa to really start the presentation.
Hey everyone, as Spencer mentioned, I am Melissa Martin, the Director of Program Development and Evaluation at the West Virginia Food and Farm Coalition, and I'm also the main contact for mini grants. If you can take a moment, open the chat. I dropped the link to the spot on our website where you can find the request for application and the application itself. That's also the link for where you would sign up to have a consultation with Spencer or myself if you are interested or have questions. The other thing on this slide that is important to you, and we'll have Spencer drop in the chat, is my email address. So the quickest way to get a response back from us, if it's just a very short question regarding your application or the request for applications, is to send me an email, and I normally get back to those very quickly. The first thing I wanted to start with is, what is a request for application? So when you click on the website link, it will pop up that there is a request for application spot, and that is pretty much the manual for applying for this grant. When you click there, it will have all of the information from our slides, plus additional information that will help you out and walk you through the application process, along with tell you any guidelines or rules that need to be followed in your application in order to ensure that you have the best application possible. The purpose of the Farm and Food Mini Grant program is multifold. So the first thing is that we want to work with farmers, independent grocery stores, or value-added producers who source local agricultural products to assist in the following four things. 1, scaling or expanding your operations. 2, increasing your operational efficiency. 3, receiving specialized training or technical assistance. Or lastly, upgrading your facilities and equipment to meet FSMA, GAP, organic certification, or other certification requirements. There are 4 funding priorities for this grant. The first one is to strengthen your knowledge, skills, and expertise through funding such things as going to trainings, workshops, acquiring technical assistants or consultants. The second one, upgrading facilities, as I mentioned already, also expanding your production capacity and ensuring that you are able to reach new markets if you're interested in expanding in that way. I received a question this week about the funding priorities, and that question was, hey, Melissa, do I have to meet all 4 of these funding priorities in order to apply? The answer is no. As long as your project that you're proposing meets at least 1 funding priority, then you are eligible to apply. And there will be a spot in the application where you are going to need to outline exactly how your project meets these priorities, which we will come back to in a little bit. As I mentioned already, there are 3 different entities that are eligible to apply. The first one is farmers. If you are engaged in agricultural production for the purpose of earning income, you are eligible to apply. In very tiny print on the screen, it also mentions that if you are growing crops for your own consumption and not planning on selling those, you would not be eligible to apply for this grant. The second one is independent grocery stores. These must be stores that are actively sourcing and selling locally grown agriculture products. There is a part in the grant application, which we will come to in a little bit, which will explain this in more detail and specifically asks you to explain the amount of locally grown agricultural products that you are selling through your store. The last eligible entity is value-added producers that utilize locally sourced raw agriculture materials, and you're either currently selling or intend to sell your products in the market space. The next thing that we wanted to point out for you is that this is a reimbursable grant. What that means is that in order to receive the money, you will need to submit documentation that an expense has occurred prior to receiving your reimbursement. This documentation may include timesheets. If you are applying for funding for staff time, timesheets would need to be submitted in order to receive reimbursement. It may include contracts, invoices, credit card statements, or copies of checks. And this would really be dependent upon what specifically you are applying for with your grant application. There are a couple key and very important notes at the bottom. The first one is that you must provide adequate documentation to the West Virginia Food and Farm Coalition in order for your expenses to be reimbursed. The second one, only expenses incurred after the grant has been approved are eligible for reimbursement. So if you are currently running a project and you already have expenses but you have not yet applied for the grant, those expenses would not be eligible. The last thing that we wanted to note, if you are planning on making a single large one-time purchase, there is a possibility that this would be considered for direct funding from the West Virginia Food and Farm Coalition on a case-by-case basis. So for example, let's say that you are buying a farm implement for your tractor that costs $7,000 and it's a single purchase. There is, under certain circumstances, situations and times where we would pay that invoice directly to where you're purchasing it from instead of you having to purchase it and then have reimbursement for that. What questions do we have so far? If you have questions, please make sure that you are dropping those in the chat so that we can make sure that we can answer them. I did receive 2 questions this week that I've already touched on one of them, and that the other question that I received this week was, will grants need to be paid back? The answer is no, as long as the expenditures are approved and they're aligned to your project goal. And so those grants, once you receive them, would not need to be paid back. The second one I mentioned already had to do with the funding priorities. You only need to meet one of those priorities. If there are no additional questions, oh, I see a couple chats popping up. Let's see what's there.
So Melissa, there's one that says, is this a taxable grant? You will I'm going to say you will most likely not receive a 1099 from the Food and Farm Coalition. But typically with this style of grants, it's money in, money out. So you don't end up owing taxes on this because all of the money coming in is spent on your business. And so folks don't end up owing taxes. That I will double check with our accountant, but I do not believe you will receive a 1099 from us. So Nita asks, Melissa, can it be part of a very large purchase? Say I need to purchase a $20,000 piece of equipment that is approved through the grant. Can I use it towards that?
The answer is yes. And so when you write your grant application, you would want to say, this is a part of a larger purchase, explain the reasoning, and then in your budget, tell us that $10,000, if that's how much is going towards it, is going towards the equipment. And then the other $20,000 would be coming from XYZ funding source or would be coming from your operating expenses.
Laura asks, if several things are under consideration, will partial grants be issued?
It is dependent on the number of grant applications that we receive. If partial grants would be issued, likely no, but it would end up depending on the number of grants that we receive, along with what the review committee, their opinions of the grants that are received or your specific grant.
I think in follow-up to this as well, we have instructed the selection committee to fund, since these are just small grants of $10,000, up to $10,000, we have instructed the committee to focus on full funding. We're not going to have them do what some funders do where, we can fund 4 people at $200 or $2,500 as opposed to one person at $10,000. We understand that you guys need these funds to get over certain humps. That being said, I think where you could potentially see partial funding is if you include something that's an unallowable expense, and that would be pulled out of the budget. Additionally, if there is sort of budget fluffing going on, and that's really kind of obvious to the committee, they could choose to pull out items from your budget as well. So I know we're not at the budget yet, but I will encourage folks to be really realistic in the budgeting of your grant application. Melissa, Lisa says, if a case doesn't qualify for a one-time direct payment, what is the turnaround from approval of grant money to issuance? I will take that. That's a really good question. So, full disclosure. So this is a program, and I might have forgotten to mention this at the beginning, that Food and Farm Coalition is doing in partnership with the Department of Ag, and they're doing in partnership with the Small Business Administration. So there's some layers of both federal and state government involved. It is our hope that we can, once all of your paperwork for an expense is turned in and it's approved, it's our hope to get you funding within 30 days. It will take us longer to get funded through the Department of Agriculture, but we always try to get folks paid in a 30-day window. So hopefully that answers that question for Lisa. Nicole, what does a company need to have in place to apply as a small-time farmer? For example, an EIN, state registration, etc. Melissa?
This grant does not require state registration in order to apply. However, it may look better to a review committee if you have it. That would be a question if you have specific questions about your small time or your farm. That would be a good question for us to talk about on a consultation. All right, so now we'll talk about the application. The application has several different parts. The first one is to describe your business. Then there will be a section to detail your funding need, a use of funds section, talking about how this will impact your operations. If you are a value-added producer or a local grocer, there's a section for local sourcing. And lastly, there is a section for budgeting. Before we start this section, I did want to provide you a few tips when you're writing grants. The first thing is to carefully read the RFA and the application questions to ensure that you meet all requirements in your answers. So sometimes when we're reviewing grants, we'll see that someone has an amazing answer, but the application section maybe has 5 parts and they only answered 1 or 2 of those parts. That means that they could be losing points in the end when those grants are being scored because they're missing a few parts. So very closely read that RFA, read the application questions, and reread your answer once you have drafted it to make sure that you are meeting all parts. The second one is to be clear and concise. Grant readers read a lot. Our review committee will read potentially a lot of grants. And so it's nice for you to be very clear and concise and not have a whole bunch of extra fluff in your application. That will allow them to see the important information very quickly. The last is to use headings and subheadings. This also allows you to check to make sure that you have answered all of the parts of the questions, but it also allows our review committee to quickly see that those sections are included. So we're going to start with the first section, which is to describe your business. This section is worth 15 points at the end on the scoring. The describe your business section is then broken down into 6 additional questions or sections. The first one is a business overview. It's important to keep in mind when you are writing a grant that though your business may be known all throughout the state of West Virginia, it may not be known by the review committee. And so it's very important when you are describing your business that you assume the person who is reading your application knows absolutely nothing about your business, and that you are providing them in this section an overview of your business. This might include the history, primary activities, what you produce. It could include the location of your business. And if you have any achievements or previous experience in agriculture or in being an independent grocer or value-added production, you want to include that information in the business overview section. The second part of this section is food resilience. And so for this part, we want to know how your business addresses food resiliency in West Virginia. I will provide a sample answer on the next slide that can give you some ideas of what this might mean and kind of help you begin to think about how you would draft your answer to this question as we continue to move on. Section number 3 of the describe your business is the market analysis. In the market analysis section, you want to describe the people who typically purchase your products. If you are a farm, you might be describing the retail locations or how your products are sold. Is it an on-farm stand? Do you go to farmers markets? Who's your target audience? Who are the people at the farmers markets who typically purchase your product? Same would be true for value-added producers. Who are the people who will be purchasing your products or that you think your products are most geared towards? You also want to talk about your pricing. How do you determine pricing for your products? You might take into account things like your cost of production. You might take into account competitor pricing. And you're also going to probably take into account the target customers. What are they willing to pay? The next part is the management plan. For this, you want to talk about your business structure. You also want to talk about maybe the staff that work for your organization or your business, along with how you organize your team to make sure that your business is run effectively. And the last part of this section is your operating plan. What resources do you need in order to operate your business? This may be equipment that you use, supplies, inventory management, or even staff resources. The describe your business section with all of those parts has a 4,000 character max, including spaces. If you are writing your application, this would be approximately 1 to 2 pages of single space text. Prior to submitting your application, you want to highlight all of the text and you want to do a word count, looking at the character count specifically for that section. The other thing that I always recommend is to go back to this checklist here on the slide, and these slides will be shared with everybody who attended. As you read through, make sure, have I included a business overview and food resiliency? If yes, check the box. Have we included market analysis, your marketing plan, management plan, and operating plans? So I wanted to take a second to show you 2 sample grant applications for this section and have you read through them and look at the checklist to see if all of the things are included. Here is a sample business overview section. I'm going to give everybody about 1 minute to read through this sample and then in the chat write how you would score this if you were a grant reviewer. And also, are there any sections of the checklist that are missing? I see Nicole, you put 2 to 3. Is that your total score for that? All right. You had 12. Lily says, this seems pretty general. Is this the correct length and level of detail that should be provided? We have someone who put a 10 to 11. 12. A 6. All right. So if we read through this, there is a business overview. It's very short and does not provide a lot of details about the business. If I were the grant reviewer, I would give that business overview perhaps a 1. If I'm being real nice, I may go a little bit higher, but probably it would be 1 or maybe even less. For market analysis, the person talks about how they go towards health-conscious consumers and local food enthusiasts. It talks about that they target their people through social media and local events, but it's still very vague. Once again, if I was a grant reviewer, I would probably score that section a 1. For the marketing plan, that was kind of lumped in with the target or the market plan. So I would maybe give that a 0 because it was lumped together and not very specific. And the operating plan was not even present in that section. So I appreciate everybody reading through that. I know that's kind of difficult, especially if you've never reviewed a grant before. As a grant reviewer, I probably would give that about a 3 or 4, maybe. And with it missing the operating plan, that could be a challenge also. So let me show you another sample of this section. I will preface this with, it's very tiny, and I apologize if you, like me, have struggle seeing tiny print. And I'm not going to take as much time for you guys to review all this, but this is a little bit better of a business sample business overview. If you notice, the first thing I see as a grant writer or as a grant reader, very quickly I can see that there is a business overview, the food resiliency is there, there's a market analysis, a marketing plan, management plan, and operating plan. All 6 of those things are there, so I can mark those off the checklist. This one does provide a lot more details, but it could potentially have more details. This would probably, for me, be a solid, probably around a 12. For the scoring, you'll notice there are little dots because it would probably continue. But overall, this sample business overview is much more in depth, and we're going to be looking for something more close to this. It's still probably about half as long as the character limit has to be, but those character limits are a maximum character limit, are not a minimum. And so you do not have to have 4,000 characters, and you could still submit a pretty good grant application without reaching those 4,000 characters for that section. All right, I don't see any questions in the chat. If you come up with some, feel free to add them and we'll go back to them towards the end. The next section is detail of funding needs. This section you have to be very careful because a lot of times when we're writing grants, we'll talk about the need briefly and then immediately jump into, and this is how I'm going to solve the problem. That's not what this section wants. It doesn't really want you to focus on your solutions or what you're asking for in the grant. It wants you to focus on the need. Why are you writing this application? What is the need there? So for this, you also want to go back to those mini grant program priorities that I talked about earlier. In this section, you want to explicitly state, this is the need, and this or these are the program priorities that this need is connected to. The detail of funding need is a 2,000 character max section, which is approximately a half to 1 page single space text. For the checklist for this one, we want to make sure that we have included a need and or opportunity, that we've clearly explained that need, and that it aligns to the mini grant program priorities. Here is an example of a detailed funding needs sample. If you read through it, it talks about how this funding is going to help this maple syrup production company do a few things. The first one is to comply with federal and state regulations, and the second one is to expand their markets. So within this, it talks about how there is a huge market for maple syrup currently, that it has surged with an increase of 25% in customer interest locally, and that a recent survey said that 78% of local grocery stores have reported higher sales for locally sourced products. So they're starting to talk about the fact that there's a huge market, and as a result, they need to expand their production. It also talks about how they currently have 5 retailers who are interested in their products, but at this current operational capacity, they are unable to supply those retailers. That's a need section. Notice again here that there's headers at the top. I can see as a grant reviewer that the need is there, and I can also see the mini grant priorities. So they then go and talk about how attending a gap and traceability workshop is linked directly to the knowledge and practice of food safety, and it aligns to the grant priorities of strengthening knowledge. They also talk about how this aligns to their grant priorities of expanding their operations. If I were reading through this, even though it is very brief, I would give them a solid 2.5 to 3 points on that. The next section is where you're going to talk about the use of your funds. So you want to describe in detail how you plan to use the grant money. You want to be specific about activities, equipment that you might purchase, any training or improvements that you intend to make. And you want to make sure that they are aligned back to the need and that they are aligned with the project that you are proposing. For the use of funds, once again, this has a 2,000 character max, including space. For our checklist, we want to describe in detail the use of funds and how it aligns with your business goals or any opportunities that you've described in the needs section. So here we have a sample of use of funds. For the same maple syrup producer that we were talking about previously, it talks about how the grant funds will be allocated for mileage reimbursement in a hotel stay, for this person to travel to Charleston to attend a workshop. It talks about how grant funds will be spent for a part of their farm director's salary and fringe benefits, which would be things such as insurance. And that it's going to be about 70 hours worth of that person's salary. And that's for attending the workshop, meeting with a consultant, undergoing a gap audit, and doing some FSMA planning. It talks about also how they are going to purchase a new cooker or evaporator to increase their production efficiency, and that they are going to invest in pouring a concrete pad for their sugar shack, which will improve sanitation and their overall syrup making efficiencies. It then goes on to talk about how this is going to help them meet the increasing demand. So there, that last sentence, they're tying it back. Why are we needing this funds? It's going to help us meet the fact that we have new markets that we want to enter, along with it's going to help us make sure that we're meeting regulatory requirements. They would likely continue and talk about how they want to make sure that they're providing safe products for their customers. But this is a pretty solid use of funds sample answer. The next section is operational impact. For this, you want to discuss how getting this grant will help your business expand. This may seem a bit redundant depending on what you put in your use of funds and your need, but you're going to go a little bit more in details about what are some tangible examples of how this is going to help your business, such as we're going to increase our production by 30%, or we're going to be able to reach 5 new markets, or we expect that we are going to generate $10,000 of new revenue for our business through this expansion a year. This has a 2,000 character max, including spaces. And once again, for your checklist, you're describing how it will impact your business. Here's an example of the operational impact. For this sample example, they talk about how the new cooker is going to allow them to increase their syrup production by 50%. They also talk about how they expect that this planned expansion will increase their annual revenue from $20,000 a year to $30,000 a year. And that's going to be because they're able to increase their production capacity, which means they're going to be able to make more syrup over time. It also talks about how by having this concrete pad, they're going to have safer products, which ultimately leads to customers wanting to come back time and time again and buy your products because they trust the products that you're selling. Last section. The next section is local sourcing. This section only needs to be answered if you are a grocer or a value-added producer. For our grocers who are thinking about applying, detail how you use raw agricultural product and or local sourcing for value-added products in your business model. So this might include things such as where do you source your fruits and vegetable produce or any other agricultural products from, the number of farms that you source from that are local. It may also include the amount of annual dollars expended on local sourcing. For value-added producers, you're going to explain also what products you are using and where you are sourcing them from in terms of local sourcing with percentages and annual dollar amounts. So if we go back to our maple syrup example, that individual as a maple syrup producer would not need to include the local sourcing sample, but our maple syrup producer works with a value-added producer who makes maple walnut custard. So if that person were applying for this grant, they might write the following answer. I want to point out in their answer, they talk about how 40% of their ingredients are locally sourced. They go on to say that they receive maple syrup from 2 local producers, which makes up about 20% of their total ingredients. They receive black walnuts from a local walnut producer, which is about 5% of the ingredients, and eggs from 2 local egg farmers, making up about 15% of their total ingredients. They also talk about how they do source their dairy from out of state, which is fine. But then this person goes on to say that they are committed to continuing to support local agriculture and may in the future explore more local sourcing. They also go then on to talk about the amount of money they spend on local sourcing. So approximately $1,000 is spent on maple syrup, $200 on locally sourced eggs, and $250 on locally sourced walnuts. And so do we have any questions at this point?
Mary asked a good question. I replied in the chat box, but it's maybe worth repeating for the whole group. So Mary says, do products have to be from West Virginia or can it be from Ohio? What's considered local? And if you don't mind, Melissa, me answering this, you are certainly allowed to use raw agricultural products from all over. In this example Melissa gave, they source their dairy from outside of the state. But priority funding will go to applicants that are using at least some of the raw agricultural products from inside of West Virginia. We are the West Virginia Food and Farm Coalition. West Virginia Department of Ag is a partner on this, so we definitely want to benefit that local by local as much as humanly possible. Melissa, the next question is, do farmers skip this section completely, and how does it affect the overall scoring to not receive these points?
Yes. So farmers do skip this section completely, and that is not going to impact your overall scoring in terms of like comparing a farm to a grocer or a value-added producer. There will be a different ratio of points for farms versus value-added producers. So let's say for farms, let's say there are 27 points. So at the end, we would set up 27 out of 27 and you got 100%, or 25 out of 27 and put you at a percentage. For value-added producers, there might be 30 points. So your final percentage, it would all be final scoring based on a percentage, not on total points. There is an other section. This allows you to write any other miscellaneous information that you may have related to your application that doesn't fit anywhere else in the grant. So if there's some information that you want the grant reviewers to know that you couldn't figure out kind of where exactly does this fit, you can put that into the other section. The last section is budget summary and budget. The first thing for this section that I want to point out is there is an incredible example of this in the RFA, where we have created a budget summary and in the budget details completely, a complete example in the RFA. So if you have not had a chance, please do review that. You can always also email me if you have specific questions. I will go through these categories quickly because we do want to make sure that we have time for additional questions and answers. The first budget category is personnel or salaries. This may be wages or hourly expenses that you are paying for your employee, specifically for related to your project. So these are not just like general salaries that are related to your current operations. You would want to be able to tie back how that salary is related to the need, your expansion project, the priorities, the rest of the grant in order to include it there. Fringe costs are things like I mentioned already, such as insurance or other benefits that you offer the employees. And typically it's a percentage of the salary or the hourly wage to calculate fringe. Supplies. There is supplies and equipment. And I wanted to point out, if I could make it bold and huge, it would be here. Supplies are single items less than $5,000 each. Now, in your thinking, maybe you're going to buy a pallet jack that is $4,500. In your mind, that may be equipment, but in the grant world, that is a supply. So if it is a single item that costs less than $5,000 for that one single item, you would include it in the supplies section of your grant. For equipment, it is a single item that's over $5,000. So maybe you want to upgrade. You want to get a pallet jack that is $6,500. That now would be an equipment and not a supply. The next line item is travel. If you're going to a conference or doing some traveling that is directly related to your project, you can include that in the budget. And that might be, I'm traveling 40 miles to go to this conference and 40 miles back. There is federal reimbursable mileage, which we can chat about if that is related to you, that you could include in your budget. Could also include a hotel room if you're traveling to a conference. to expand your knowledge about a specific topic. Consultants and contractors, these would be things like electricians, installers, even technical assistance providers. And the last one is other. So these would be registration costs to attend trainings. Here I have provided a sample budget summary. This is also in the RFA. And we're going to go on, for the sake of time, budget details. So if you are doing personnel, you would need to fill out this little chart for personnel. Remember, those are your salaries and wages. If you are doing fringe, you would need to fill out this chart again for the fringe, a separate chart. For supplies, we would fill out these information. For supplies, I'm going to show an example to make this more clear. Equipment, travel. Every one of those line items there would have its own little chart for that line item. So here's a sample. If we go back to our maple syrup example, they wanted to, as a supply cost, they're going to need to purchase some concrete for their concrete pad and some poly tubing, which they're going to use for prepping items to ship. So if you look, the item is the concrete. The cost is $266.50. And then in the narrative explanation for the need, that's where you talk about how you got that cost. So in this case, the person was buying 10 bags of concrete at $26.65 per bag. And then they also want to say this concrete is used to pour the pad for our sugar shack, which ties back that expense to your project and helps us see very explicitly why that expense is in your budget. If we go down to equipment, they're buying a maple syrup cooker evaporator. Notice that's over $5,000, which is why it is in the equipment section and not the supplies. And then in the narrative, they talk about we're buying this evaporator and the hope is that it's going to help us increase our efficiency. When you are submitting your budget, you want to make sure that you submit both the budget summary and these detailed budget samples for each line item that you're including. Once again, all of the budget sample is in the RFA. I wasn't able to fit it on our slides today.
So Maggie asks a really good question. And for folks reading this, I want to make a differentiation. And if you have questions, certainly either email Melissa or book a consultation with us. So I want to note that Melissa has concrete listed in here at a cost of $266.50, which is the cost of 10 bags of concrete. And this is correctly in this budget as a supply line item. Maggie asks, would things that come more than $5,000 but aren't really equipment still be equipment? For an example, concrete costs per yard. So this could go a couple of ways. If you were just buying bags of concrete that you're going to pour yourself, those individual bags of concrete cost less than $5,000. That's a supply. If you're going to pay somebody to just come pour that concrete pad, that's actually going to be a contractor expense. And then lastly, I had actually told Maggie that in this very specific example, it would probably be considered an other expense. It could also be considered, I think, potentially contractual. So there's potentially more than one way to skin a cat, not to make things confusing for folks, but I did want to follow up very specifically on that question. But if I think the reason I told Maggie that we could put that in other is if you're essentially buying, concrete by the yard, it might belong in other for expense purposes. So that is as clear as mud. I apologize. If things are in the wrong category, we're not going to worry about it too much. We'll help you get it in the right space in the end.
Fine. There are a few unallowable expenses. So things that we cannot spend your grant money on. The first one is alcohol. The second one is food that is intended to be a part of a meal. So let's say you want to hold a workshop at your grocery store and you want to feed everybody a meal while you're there. That would not be an allowable expense. Personal home or house expenses are unallowable. Payments on loans, lines of credit, or other forms of debt. costs associated with lobbying or any sort of political activity. And lastly, expenses unrelated to the expansion product, such as raw materials, supplies, or inventory for your current operations. That is where it comes, that final column of our detailed budget sample, the narrative example, where that is very important that you provide details there as to why the item is in your budget and how it relates back to your project, so we can ensure that all of the items in your budget are allowable. The last slide we have here is, once again, how you find the request for application. That's also where the application material is. It's also where you can set up a time to meet with Spencer or I if you have questions related to your project. Please be reminded that these grants are due for round 1 by August 12th, 2024 at 11 p.m. If you submit your grant at 11:01 on August 12th, it will not be considered for round 1. It would go into round 2 consideration. So please make sure that you do meet that application deadline. And we expect that the award notifications will come out sometime in September for round 1. There will be a second round of these grants later, coming out in the end of November. They'll become available. They'll be due on January 7th. We will have another training webinar for that as we get closer, and award notifications for round 2 will come out on February 2025. In February of 2025. If you have any additional questions, feel free to leave those in the chat.
Melissa, Maggie wants to know, what's the difference between round 1 and round 2? Could all of the money be spent in round 1?
So no, round 1, there will be 2 rounds of this grant. There will be part of the money spent in round 1 and part of the money spent in round 2. The amount of money that is spent in round 1 will be dependent upon the number of applications, the quality of applications that we receive. We do not anticipate spending more. There will be possibly more than 50%, but there will be plenty of money left for round 2 also. There will be 2 rounds of grants.
Melissa, Lily would like to know, does one application bump to round 2, or is there a re-application process?
No. So in order to submit the application, which I should have put in this webinar, you will need to email it to grants@wvfoodandfarm.org. That will just stay in there. I will respond and say, hey, just wanted to let you know that this was not received prior to the deadline and that we will consider it for round 2.
Erin wants to know how many grants will be awarded.
That's dependent upon the amount of grants requested. So some people may request the full $10,000. Some people may request $1,000 or $2,000. So we can't really say a specific number of the grants that are awarded, but there is $250,000 available for this grant for the total between round 1 and 2.
So this question has come up twice. I'm going to combine. So can you apply for both rounds and potentially be awarded both?
No. You can only receive one grant of up to $10,000 through this program.
I will mention that if you put an application in this round and it's not in the first round and it's not quite as competitive as it could be, everybody will receive those applications that are fundable but not funded will receive a revise and resubmit opportunity for the latter round. Shanae says, if you apply for round 1 are not awarded, will it roll into round 2 or would that warrant a reapply? I think we might have addressed this already. Melissa, do you anticipate people needing to resubmit applications? Yes, the answer is yes. I apologize. You will want to resubmit your application, but we will be communicative with everybody about that. Melissa, would you want to bring up the mini grants web page and just show folks where each of the the buttons are that allow for the downloadable RFA. The application template, as well as how to schedule consultations.
Yes. All right, so here is the mini grants webpage. When you go to the West Virginia Food and Farm Coalition webpage, up top, there is a tab that says Mini Grants 2024. And then you want to hit the drop down that says Farm and Food Mini Grants. Once you get there, there's a general bit of information about the mini grants. The request for proposal, once again, that is the application instructions. You want to make sure that you read that and pay very close attention. Request for proposal is also where you can find the sample budget if you would like to take a closer look at that. You can download the application by clicking this link. And the training register, where it says register for training webinar, this training webinar and the slides provided will go on that link there. And then if you're interested in scheduling a consultation, we have two different tabs here in bright blue. The first one is if you're interested in scheduling a consultation between July 10th and 19th. The second one between July 22nd and 26th. When you click on that link, it will pull up the calendar of available spots. And you click on the available spot. You'll put your name, your email address, and book, and then that will send you a Google Calendar invite.
All right. You're welcome, Nita. Thank you so much. Melissa and I can hang out for a few minutes if folks have some questions that they don't care to share with the whole group. But hearing no other questions, I think we'll release everybody for the night. Thank you guys for attending. We will have all of these links on that webpage tomorrow.